Hi everyone, welcome back to the Stitches and Scribbles channel. My name is Erin and I have a reading podcast for you today. Just in case you're new to the channel, I alternate my podcasts between things I read and things I've made. So if you want to stick around for the next episode of the podcast, that'll be all craft related things. But today we're talking about books, specifically all of the books that I met in May, and it was all of the books that I read in May, not met in May. And there were quite a lot of books that I read in May. Part of that is because I put a screen time limit on my phone, mostly because I noticed how much I was making scrolling a habit, especially while falling asleep, and I wanted to try to minimize that as much as I could. So I put a screen time limit on my phone and started actually reading before bed or reading when I had a few extra minutes or things like that. It's not so much that I'm trying to limit screen time overall, it's that I was trying to limit the scrolling. Like if I'm watching a movie or TV show with my family, that doesn't really bother me in terms of screen time. Or seeing a movie with friends or things like that, or working on the computer because I have to use a computer for work. But I was really trying to get away from the mindlessly scrolling part of screen time. Because that wasn't a habit that I wanted to continue. So because of that, my average for the last couple months was like 5 to 7 books a month. And I think I read 13 in the month of May. What was it? Looking on my app, I read, how many? Yes, 13 books in the month of May. So it definitely worked out in my favor. I'm happy that I made that choice. But it does mean that we have a lot of books to go through today. The first one that I read in May, I read as a Kindle book. If you have Amazon Prime, there's a section of the Kindle app where you get access to one, sometimes 2 free books a month. They're usually books that are just coming out, and it's called Kindle First Reads. And this was one of the books that I had selected from, I forget if it was this month or a previous month. But it was called The Secrets Below, and it's by Vivica Sten and Camilla Sten, and it's actually translated from Swedish, I believe. And I was not expecting this book to be good. I kind of read the description, and it read as kind of a paranormal mystery with strong kind of ties to water and underwater creatures. And it follows the 12-year-old main character whose name is Tuva. I could be pronouncing characters' names wrong because they're all in Swedish, but it's spelled T-U-V-A, so I was reading it as Tuva as I was reading. Tuva lives in Sweden and a small archipelago, but she actually lives on an island near the archipelago, so there's a lot of the storyline where she's going back and forth to school by boat. And one of her classmates has gone missing. She ends up kind of befriending a new boy at school named Rasmus, and they're trying to figure out what happened to the missing boy, but also something very mysterious happens to Rasmus and Tuva in the woods when they're out on a field trip, and they're not sure if they've seen something magical or something very dark and evil. So it's a really interesting premise for the book, and this is one that I would consider adding to the school library where I work at. It was beyond incredible. I loved this book so much. It felt like something that I would have loved reading when I was the same age as the characters, but also I think it would be a great book for any middle school reader. And I think we don't very frequently read books that have been translated, especially children's books. I think it's a little bit more common in adult literature to read something that wasn't originally written in English. But this book did not have kind of the overwhelming feeling where you feel like you're missing something from a translated book. It felt very clear, still very engaging and easy to read, even for a younger person who might be reading it. So The Secrets Below, and it is the first book in a series. I think the second one is not out yet. I believe I tried to find it and couldn't. So there may be more coming soon, but highly, highly recommend that book, especially if you have a middle school aged reader in your life that you could share it with. Continuing on the topic of middle school books, the next one I read was Lilani of the Distant Sea by Erin and Trotta Kelly. And I did read this as a physical book. I don't have it with me because it belongs to the school library where I work. It was a book, well, I actually found it for the kids at Half Price Books and paid all of, I think, $1 for it. But Erin and Trotta Kelly has a couple of other really well-known books that we have in our school library. So when I saw one of hers that we didn't have, I decided to pick it up. And this book was also very good. It was a very like lyrical fantasy story. I had another student who read it who said it reminded her a lot of Moana, and I will agree. There's a lot of parallels to Moana, but it's inspired by Filipino culture and folklore, and that also was a really interesting lens through which to view a fantasy story. Again, kind of going into the topic of things that we don't do commonly as readers, is read fantasy that is not inspired by European culture. We have lots of kind of the stereotypical high fantasy that is very strongly based in the culture of England and Europe, but we don't see fantasy from other cultures quite as often. I'm also a big fan of the book Zara the Windseeker by Nnedi Okorafor-Mbachu, and this book felt a lot like reading that book. I realize that one's also kind of a niche pick and not one that most people are familiar with, but it still felt like the fantasy that most kids are going to want to read, but it added a lot of additional layers because it's a culture that isn't commonly represented in fantasy. So I was really happy that I picked up this book for my school library. I rated it 4 stars. There were parts where I, as an adult reader, found it a little bit slow, but I do think that that is kind of the purpose of the writing style. So even though it wasn't something I particularly enjoyed, I don't think that means that it's by any means a bad book. And I did give The Secrets Below 5 stars. I think I forgot to say that. The next book I read was The Art of Living, The Cardinal Virtues, and the Freedom to Love by Edward Sri. This was my adoration book for the beginning of the month of May. I started it in April. If you haven't watched my reading podcast before, I am a practicing Catholic and I go to adoration once a week. And I prefer to read during my adoration time, so I always have a book with me, and this was my choice for that month. I did really like this book. There's a lot of really good concrete information in it, and also just a lot of personal stories from Dr. Edward Sri that made it really engaging. I did happen to see him, performance is the wrong word. He gave a talk somewhere local to me that I did happen to see before reading this book, and a lot of the stories he told kind of overlapped between the talk I saw in person and the book, which I think if you're looking for new information, that might be a little off-putting, but for me, it kind of like pulled me back into what he was talking about because I'd heard it once already. I highly recommend his books. If you have the opportunity to see him live in person, he's a really engaging speaker. And yeah, this was a great book. I did purchase a couple others that he wrote that I think might be a little bit more engaging for me personally. This was kind of a big overview of the cardinal virtues, but highly recommend it, especially if you also attend adoration and are looking for something to read. The next book I read is also one that I had gotten from Half Price Books, and it is for the school library. This was Amari and the Knight Brothers by B.B. Alston. Oh, I forgot to say, I gave The Art of Living 5 stars. This book made me think of reading Harry Potter for the first time. It follows Amari, who is a young girl in, I think it was New York City. She finds out that her brother was a member of a secret society and school, and he has gone missing. So she joins this secret society called the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs to try to see what happened to her brother Quentin. This has all of the kind of silliness and background humor of Percy Jackson with the kind of big epic fantasy feeling of something like Harry Potter or Artemis Fowl, along with kind of almost a Spy Kids vibe. Really loved this book, definitely adding it to my school library. This actually was recommended to me by a student first, so it was really fun to kind of take one of my students' recommendations and read it right away. And also just the luck of finding it for $1 at Half Price Books was really fun. But I gave this one 5 stars. It was incredible. If you have a young reader in your life, or if you enjoy reading children's books, this was very engaging even as an adult reader, which was awesome. The next 2 books that I read were Dragon Singer and Dragon Drums, which are part of Anne McCaffrey's Harper Hall of Pern trilogy. This is part of the larger Dragon Riders of Pern series, but these books kind of exist as a little trilogy within the series and are meant for younger readers than the rest of the series is. I read books 2 and 3 of the trilogy, which are technically books 4 and 6 of the overall series. Figuring out which books were part of this trilogy was very confusing when I tried to order these originally. They were both very good. I did talk about the first one in one of my previous podcast episodes, so you can go check that one out. I won't talk too much about books 2 and 3, other than book 2 follows Manali's journey, who's the main character from the first book, as she progresses through her journey at Harper Hall and becoming a Master Harper. But then Dragon Drums, which is the 3rd book in the trilogy, follows a different character that is introduced in the 2nd book. So I wasn't expecting that. I thought that the 3rd book was still going to follow Manali, but it doesn't. It follows, I'm now forgetting his name, and I can't get it out. Oh, it's on the back, Piemur. At least I'm assuming that's how his name is pronounced. It's Piemur. The 3rd book follows Piemur. Very well written. I would like to investigate the rest of the series someday, but I feel like I have to sit down and read them actually in order, which would mean rereading these in the sequence that they go with the rest of the books. I gave them both 5 stars, and again, if you want to hear more about the first book, that's going to be in my previous reading podcast episode, which should be from the beginning of April-ish. No, beginning of May, because I was talking about what I read in April. The next book I read was an audiobook. I read Ozma of Oz by L. Frank Baum, and I got these as an Audible collection that has the first 14 books in the Oz series. If you didn't know, the Wizard of Oz series has, I think, 40-something books, but only the first 14 were written by L. Frank Baum. I happen to know this because my great-grandfather collected the original editions for my grandmother when she was little, and my mom has carried on the collection and is kind of trying to fill in the missing volumes. So I do think we have all original 14 first editions, but she's slowly trying to fill in the other first editions for the other books. But I think we have 30 of them now, so there's only a few left to find. Ozma of Oz was very good. If you have seen the movie Return to Oz, which I thought everybody had seen because Wizard of Oz was so popular, but in talking about it with friends and colleagues my age, it turns out this was not a movie that everybody saw. But Return to Oz, I think the movie came out in like the 80s, is kind of how I remember the Wizard of Oz stories, mostly because they cast an actress to play Dorothy who was actually the correct age. She was closer to 12 years old versus Judy Garland was, I believe, 16 when the Wizard of Oz movie was filmed. And the Return to Oz movie was not a musical. It was just a movie. And I think it kept some of the almost like unsettling vibes of the original Oz books. I don't want to go as far as to compare them to why can't I think of the director now? The guy who did Nightmare Before Christmas, Tim Burton. They're not quite all the way to Tim Burton, but there are some parts of the books that are just odd, and I think that didn't come across as well in the Judy Garland version of Wizard of Oz, nor do I think Wicked accurately represents it. But the original Oz books and then the Return to Oz movie, I think, capture it more clearly. But if you have seen Return to Oz, Ozma of Oz, the book, will feel very familiar because they kind of mashed two books to make the Return to Oz movie. They combined Ozma of Oz with the previous book in the series, which was, now I can't remember. I also don't know why it's not showing it to me. Oh, The Marvelous Land of Oz. So they basically took the villain from The Marvelous Land of Oz and kind of transplanted her into the story of Ozma of Oz for the movie. So again, if you're choosing to read these books, I would read both of those together if you're thinking that you're going to get the movie version, because there are elements from both that are kind of mixed together. I did give this 5 stars. I really liked listening to this as an audiobook as well. They are pretty short audiobooks. They're all around or under 5 hours per book, so I'm kind of just slowly plugging through those. The next book I read was another one I found at Half Price Books. This one I bought for myself, not for the kids, because I knew that I would really like it. This is The Ogress and the Orphans by Kelly Barnhill. She is also the writer of... have it behind me, I'm gonna say the title wrong. The Girl Who Drank the Moon, which is a Newbery Award winner. And this was also one that kind of fell in the category of, I knew we had it in the school library, I knew I had the other book by her, and really enjoyed it, so I wanted to read another one. This one was such a sweet story, but also such a good allegory for how gossip spreads and how people are so quick to misjudge someone who lives on the outside of their society. And also how easily people fall for clever words and tricks and being told that they're being provided for when they're not. So not only is this just a fantastic children's book, there's a lot of life lessons in here as well. I happened to find a signed copy at Half Price Books, and it was also misshelved in the adult section, which is why I kept it for myself. This would be totally fine for younger readers. I believe Kelly Barnhill is known for writing children's books. I don't think she writes adult books. But this was incredible. I love it so much. This easily kind of landed itself in a new favorite children's fantasy category for me. So that one I gave 5 stars. The next book I read was Local Woman Missing by Anna Kubica. Not Anna, by Mary Kubica. I don't know why I said the wrong first name. And this is one that I picked up in a little free library. And this was a good mystery. I will say that it had a lot of medical scenes in it that I was not expecting. So if that's something that you're not into, the back does not give any sort of an indication that that's going to happen, but there's a lot of like labor and delivery moments, as well as the doctor's appointments associated with that. And they do go very into detail with those things. So if that's not something you're looking for to read on the page, I wouldn't recommend this. But it was a good murder mystery. I read it very quickly. I gave it 4 stars. Even though I liked it, there wasn't anything particularly special about it. I can see why it got so much hype, but I wouldn't go out and buy this. I would say if you have little libraries in your area, just wait. One of these is going to turn up in there eventually because it was so popular. The next book I read was The Lake House by Sarah Beth Durst, and I read this as an audiobook through Audible. And I knew Sarah Beth Durst as an author from her book The Spell Shop, which is fantasy. This was definitely a paranormal mystery, which is very different from The Spell Shop. And it follows 3 girls who end up stranded in the woods thinking that they're going to attend a summer camp. And the rest of the campers, the counselors, everybody perishes in a fire, and they now have to survive on an island until they can be rescued. But as they are trying to figure out how to survive and getting the lay of the land, they realize that there's someone else on the island and something else on the island. And this was a very creepy, atmospheric mystery. The one thing that I didn't like about it, and this is why I gave it 4 stars instead of 5, the teenage girl speak was a little too present in big parts of the story. And when I say that, I don't mean to diminish how teenage girls talk to each other. I think that this was so overinflated that it kind of took me out of the story as a reader. And I think if we were talking realistically about young female characters in the face of an emergency, they would, for the most part, get their act together and figure it out. And there was just a little too much of the, like, kind of silly, fluffy banter in serious moments for me, to the point of where it didn't feel like a realistic portrayal of teenage characters. So take that with a grain of salt. I think a teen reader maybe would really like it and maybe wouldn't notice that as much, but as an adult reader, I kind of felt like the way the characters spoke to each other was a little bit off, and maybe that's also because I was listening to the audio version and the narrator was exaggerating those characteristics. But I think overall it was still a good paranormal mystery. Just be warned ahead of time that you will get a lot of annoying teenage girl stereotypes in the story. Moving on to another recently very popular one. I finally read The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I tried to pick this up so many times. I tried the audiobook and just was never in the right mind space to read it. Suddenly picked it up again and absolutely blew through it. And this is a 478 page book. So to blow through it quickly was a lot, but it was so good. This is a realistic mystery thriller, so not paranormal. And follows a family and a summer camp through multiple years, through multiple characters, and you kind of just keep getting snippets of the story released by each character until you can finally put the whole story together. But it follows mostly a family who owns this summer camp, who previously had a young child go missing. They then had a second child after the disappearance of the first, and the second child has now gone missing as a teenager. So it's following the panicked search for where Barbara has gone, Barbara being the second child who disappears, and kind of uncovering the secrets of the disappearance of the first child. But it also kind of shows the relationship between this very wealthy family who owns the camp and owns the land, and all of their employees and the people who live in the area around them, kind of observing this very wealthy family and how they keep secrets from everybody. But highly recommend. This one is worth the hype. Really, really enjoyed reading it. And that one I also found from a little free library, by the way. The next one I read was A Death on Corfu by Emily Sullivan. This is also one I got from a little free library and was shocked because it looks brand new. This was a historical mystery set in the Victorian times, following an English character who has moved to Greece originally with her husband and her children, and her husband has passed away. So she's living on the island of Corfu following her husband's death and kind of trying to figure out her life as a widow living there. And there's a mysterious mystery author who moves in next door to escape writer's block and work on his novel, which she ends up helping with. This is a very sweet murder mystery. There's a romance element, as you could probably tell from the author that just kind of shows up next door. But this was a really engaging, quick read. A lot of really excellent descriptions of the beautiful scenery and all of that. So this would be a good like beach read mystery. The next book I read is the one where I had some issues with it. This one I also got from a little free library. This was Rogue Princess by B.R. Myers. Is it B.R.? Yes, B.R. Myers. And I gave this one 3 stars. If I'm being honest with myself, I probably should have given it 2 based on how I felt after I was reading it. Now, for this one, I am going to give spoilers. This is also the last book that I'm reviewing today. So if you don't want to hear the spoilers, you can click off now. Thanks for watching, all that stuff. This was a reverse Cinderella story. So it follows the Princess Delia and, I'm now forgetting the characters' names, Aiden, who works in the palace and is kind of a rogue thief type character, which actually reminded me more of the story of Aladdin than Cinderella, but it says that it was inspired by Cinderella in a couple of the blurbs and reviews. I think Aladdin would have been a more correct way to view this. Very sweet story. Very, teen romance. I loved the world building. Here's where I got really disappointed. Towards the end of the book, so backtracking. In this story, there are androids, so artificial intelligence, that are present in the story. And I could kind of feel from the very beginning that the author is trying to endear you to artificial intelligence characters and treating them as human. Now, I will say that this came out in 2020, so kind of before the big AI boom, which I think is just unfortunate timing for the author. However, as the book progresses, you figure out that Aiden is actually an android. And to me, that just immediately killed the vibe of where the story was going. It kind of made me upset as a reader. And again, this is not really the author's fault. At the time that this was published, having a romantic relationship with something of artificial intelligence was still a fantasy element. That was not something that people could really do. However, with the rise of stories of people being in romantic relationships with chatbots and viewing AI as a necessary part of life, this fell really flat. And again, I do feel badly for the author on that part, because I think if I had read it when it came out, I maybe would not have had the same view. It maybe would have been something that I enjoyed. But now with the rise of AI and AI taking over creative spaces in particular, having it be present in a book as the romantic interest felt really off. And I maybe have a particular frustration with this because I really don't like the direction that AI is going. I mentioned before that I'm practicing Catholic, and the Pope just put out an encyclical about AI and our responsibility as humans to preserve the dignity of human life and intelligence and creativity. And it's unfortunate that something that went from a purely fantasy science fiction element has now become something real. And it bothered me in a way that I wasn't expecting it to, because I grew up watching things like Star Trek, where there are android characters, and I'll use Data as an example. Data's humanity is kind of always questioned throughout the series because he's not a human, he's an android. However, Data is a very emotionally neutral character. He does not display emotions. He does not have romantic relationships with humans, and in the few cases where he does, it's kind of proven to be a bad idea each time. And Data is just kind of seen as a category of his own when it comes to humanity, which I think, even though that back at that time those show creators wouldn't have known that AI was so close to becoming a reality, I think that that was the right way to go with that subject matter, is that Data is not human. He performs as a human. He has a lot of skills that make him appear to be human, but at the end of the day, he is very clearly an android, and no one can mistake that in how you interact with him. He's very blunt, but helpful. He also has a visually different appearance from humans, kind of on purpose to make him not blend in as much, versus a story like Rogue Princess where our protagonist Delia doesn't know that Aiden is a robot when she starts a romantic relationship with him. She fully falls in love with him before finding out that he's an android. And Aiden doesn't even know that he's an android in the story. He thinks that he's fully human. And something about that covering up of the truth as the storyline just didn't sit right. And again, I know it's supposed to mimic Cinderella, so it's, you know, Cinderella in the original story appears as a princess, but she's not really a princess. And I think that that's what was trying to be mimicked there, but it fell flat. It was something that became not enjoyable, unfortunately, because of the society that we live in today. So yeah, I feel bad for the author because it probably would have been a good book 5 years ago when it came out, but now it just doesn't hit the same. And I am worried that that will continue to happen with the sci-fi genre in particular, that more and more books will not have the same feel as they did when they were originally published, because of the developments we've made in technology and because of the direction those developments are taking. So it didn't really mean for this to turn into a lecture about AI. This is more of a how AI is represented in literature, but I don't think we're using it correctly. And I definitely don't think it has a place in the creative spaces, and that seems to be where it is taking over a lot of things. So that's my 2 cents on that topic. But hopefully there are still books out there that you enjoy. I know that overwhelmingly the ones I read this month were books that I did enjoy. This was kind of just the odd one out because of that particular topic. But I'm looking forward to reading lots more over the summer. I do think the limiting screen time was really good for my reading ability. So I'm going to continue with that goal of having limited scrolling time so that I can read more books. And hopefully not all of them will have android love interests in them, because that was disappointing. Anyway, that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you heard at least one book today that you would be interested in reading as well. And if you're interested in following me here on YouTube, you can hit the subscribe button down below. I post videos once a week, most of the time when I can. It's mostly crafty things, but once a month I do a podcast like this where I talk about everything that I've read. And I am also a children's librarian at a school, so I do talk about children's literature frequently as well. And if you're interested in crafty content, you can find that here too. And if you want to follow me on other social media sites, that information is in the description box below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.